The third test we're going to look at is the economic reality test. And the economic reality test focuses on financial considerations. What is the economic reality of this relationship? We're not going to look at the work itself, but instead we're going to focus on the financial reality that accompanies the work. The economic reality test said, let's de-emphasize the idea of control over the work, but instead let's look at the financial relationship between the worker and the employer. Does it look like employment, or does it look like independent contractor work? The economic reality test is used to classify workers under a number of statutes, including the Fair Labor Standards Act, meaning overtime and minimum wage, the Equal Pay Act, the FMLA, Family and Medical Leave Act, and the Employee Polygraph Protection Act. So in order to determine whether you can bring a claim for failure to pay minimum wages or failure to pay overtime, that's a FLSA claim, the court will be required to use the economic reality test. The economic reality test is how we're going to classify workers under these statutes. Now, the 6 factors make up the economic reality test. 6 factors, starting with the extent of the individual's investment in equipment and facilities. Meaning, is the individual invested in the work itself? Does the person you hire for this job, are they going to use their own tools, or are you going to provide the tools? If they have to invest in their own tools, then that looks more like an independent contractor. If instead they're using your materials, your equipment, then that looks like employees. So if I hire a carpenter and I bring in a carpenter and I say, here's the equipment and I want you to build me a shelf over there, as opposed to, I need a shelf over there, can you do that? Well, the greater the investment of the individual in that equipment, then the more that indicates independent contractor status. The second one's very important, and we'll talk about that in more just a second. But in essence, it says, is it possible to lose money on this job? If there's no opportunity for loss, then that looks like employment. When you go to work for someone as an employee, you don't usually lose money doing so. So if there is an opportunity for profit, gain, or loss, then that looks more like an independent contractor. So if I agree to pay a party to come in and build a shelf, and I say, here's the specifications for the shelf, go out and build me a shelf. Well, if there's a chance that he may lose money on the deal, the carpenter may lose money, then that looks more like independent contractor status. Control, here it is again. How much control is exercised over the individual's work? Does the individual have the right to control its own work? Or do others have the ability to exercise control over that work? How important is the service to the employer's business? Meaning, is the service provided by the individual, is that an integral part of the business? Is that what the business does? There was a movement back in the early years of the 20th century. A mine operator, a company that operated a mine, fired all of its employees and rehired them as independent contractors. And they said, we're just going to pay you on the amount of coal that you get out of the ground. Everyone's an independent contractor. It's all going to be based on how much coal you dig out. You dig out a lot, you make a lot of money. You dig out a little, you don't make as much money. The workers objected to this. They said, well, we're employees. And the court that eventually addresses this says, what is the business of the mine? The business of the mine is pulling coal out of the ground and selling it. And therefore, these workers are integral to that business. They are the business. And therefore, that looks like employment. Think of it as the cleaning contractor hypothetical. If I run a retail establishment, the business that I'm in is selling goods to the public. It's not cleaning the floors. Cleaning the floors are incidental to my main business. So if I hire an independent contractor to clean those floors, that's less integral to my business than if I hired independent contractors to sell my goods. So how important are the services to the employer's business? Is it permanent, or what level of permanency is there? The longer the term, the more it looks like employment. Is this a 3-month job? Is it a 6-month job? Is it a 1-year job? Or is it simply, I'm going to hire you, bring you on to do the work, and then at some point it may end? So we look to see the permanency of the job, the permanency of the relationship, in order to determine whether they are employees or independent contractors. Independent contractor pretty much implies that it's going to be a limited time job. There's a limited scope to this job. And finally, the skill required of the individual. The higher the skill level of the individual, the more likely it is that they are going to be independent contractors. The higher the level of the skill, the lower the level of the skill, then the more likely it is that they're going to be considered employees. So what's the skill? The final test that we're going to talk about is sort of related to the economic reality test, the right of control test. And that's called the entrepreneurial aspect test. And this kind of came out of a case from a few years ago called FedEx Home Delivery versus NLRB. And this case was interesting in that it was another of those FedEx cases in which there were a number of factors that seemed to point to both employee status and independent contractor status. There were things like dress code and grooming codes and route maps, and all of those looked like employee. But then there were other parts of the contract that we haven't talked about yet that in fact looked like they were independent contractor status. For instance, a driver was free to hire someone else to drive their route. Or a driver could acquire several routes. A driver could incorporate itself. Driver could make itself an LLC. The driver could own its own truck. The drivers, well, they were all required to own their own truck, but I'm free to go out and buy that truck from whoever I want as long as it meets the standards. So there was a lot of things that looked like independent contractor status. And the court, when looking at this question, said that, the common law agency test, right of control, is important, but there's a lot of other factors. And one of those is this idea of profit or loss, the opportunity for profit or loss. And they said that really looks like entrepreneurship. That in fact, if you are an entrepreneur, you're much more likely to be an independent contractor. If you can create a business, sell the services of that business, and then reap rewards from it, then that looks more like independent contractor. And so this court sort of went at it from a different perspective, saying the important thing is not simply control, but the important thing is, are they acting as entrepreneurs? Are they out building a new business? Do they have risk involved in terms of a loss? Do they have the opportunity to innovate and change? Are they actually out there in the marketplace? Those are all examples of entrepreneurship, things that indicate entrepreneurship. And therefore, they used the common law test, but said, right to control is not the only factor, and in fact, maybe it's not the best factor to use. Instead, let's look to see, was there the opportunity for entrepreneurship? Because that's what an independent contractor is. That's what an independent contractor looks like, is someone who is in business for themselves and not doing the business of someone else. So in conclusion, what do we learn? Employee classification is a problem. It's a huge problem. We know that defining worker status is difficult, and that courts use a variety of legal tests to determine employee status. I'll put some more material online about all of these tests. Make sure you read that over. It's a complicated area, and in fact, there's no good answer. There's no definitive way of knowing who's an employer or who's an employee or who's an independent contractor. One of the things I'm going to charge you with doing on a writing requirement is to look at a set of facts and then tell me, are these independent contractors or are they employees? All right, thanks a lot.